tried to shoot this video last night, but the iPhone has decided that now and then we want to get into a really, really long video, it just cuts off and ruins everything. And there's nothing there. And it's done that 2 times out of my last long 3 vids. So rather than try this again with a 66% chance of it not working and me having a moment, because last night, usually I'm a procrastinator, but last night I thought, well, I'll go and shoot the vid and then upload it later the next day. And that happened and completely lost my place and train of thought. My mind is a machine. I had a checklist and I was checklisting things off in my head. And now we are going to try this all over again. I might say hi to a couple people in chat, but I will be mostly trying to organize my thoughts. And no one's expecting me. So, here it is. So, I will go into it. Now, if you've watched the last video, you understand my distinctive states. Now, ego states will evolve over time. Well, my life evolved over time. Now, I always wanted a family. From my bad childhood, the fix-it male part of me wanted a family. And that is what I always wanted. So, that was a part of my long-term goals, even with the different ego states. Hello, Rachel. I'll be doing a presentation, so, I won't be talking to chat much, because the phone is, when I get about 18 minutes into a vid, 2/3 of the time it's cutting off. And I tried to shoot this as a video, and it did not work. And it made me unhappy, so we thought, well, you know how I can get around this? I can just shoot it as a live. And I also don't have time constraints. So if I wish to meander a bit, I can. Well, my life, the way it was, as I said, I had 6 distinct ego states. The main ego state being damaged. And that's what the other 5 were to pick up for. And, hello, Steve. And that pretty much did make me bit more into a machine. Now, when we talked off, my last about my childhood, we talked about my abusive father. Now, my father did, after a couple of years, stop hitting me. And the reason why was my firearms training. Because as a little kid, I showed an high adeptness for using a firearm, which the rest of my family was very, very appreciative of. Now, as you see that I had a different kind of family life. My father was a Union thug. My father was always politically involved, and so was my entire family, in political thuggery. So all of our houses were built around a central arsenal. In this central arsenal, you know how they say, lock the guns for your kids? When I was a kid, there was a room that was literally nothing but an arsenal. I mean, so to me as a child, handling a gun was no different than handling a toy hammer. Except this hammer could knock people down forever. So, so guns have always been, just not a big deal to me. But, I have these different ego states, and we, as I say before, we argued with my therapist. But I wanted to put that in about my father because I know a lot of people would be, concerned about that. A lot of people that care about me. But after a couple years, he did stop hitting me. When he felt that his life could be at threat. Because my father was a narcissistic psychopath. That's how I can tell them so quickly on YouTube. I had to grow up dealing with this. And at the point that he would feel that his life would be in jeopardy, you would see a whole different him. Now, in 2001, 9 days after 9/11, my dad went and got himself killed in an accident. And the very next year, my mother went into a coma. And she had brain damage. And at 32 years old, my life ended, as it was. Because at that time, I had plenty of money, and life was a bitch for everyone else. But, a part of my ego states we talked about is the knight. He will do the honorable things, so I took care of my mother. And my mother was brain damaged. So for 10 years, you couldn't sit in the room with her for 5 minutes without her starting to shriek and scream at you endlessly. People hear me talk about World of Warcraft. That was the reason for World of Warcraft. At some point, it devolved. I had to be there 20 hours a day. And that was my only escape, was into that video world. Other than that, I had chores, taking care of her, 2 places, and being screamed at. And I took it all. And, I believe to let people know that there are lines. And I sat for those 10 years and, ate every nasty thing that my mother said to me, every hurtful thing that she could say to me. And when she would go too far over a line, I would just look at her like this and say, "Stupid bitch." Just like that. No different, no more inflection. And then I would just turn around and walk off. And then I'd go in the other room and I'd shut the door. And I'd put on some music, and that would be the end of our interaction for the day. And I wouldn't interact with her for the rest of the day. Because my mother wanted me to fight with her. Because that was, her favorite thing to do with my father. But what it turns out, you see, these ego states that we talked about in part 1, taking care of my mother during a decade, it turns out that my core ego state does caring, emotion, and also things like tending. So that damaged ego state had to do all of this, and it was slowly being brought out more and more and more. And that caused me much more issues. That system that we talked about in part 1, that was a huge disruption from the system. Because, as the rattlesnake ego state, I kind of thought that was all me. Because I only knew 3 of my ego states, and I knew another 3 after I got into therapy because of a therapist. Until I got into therapy, I knew of the rattlesnake, I knew of the devil, and I knew of the knight. I did not know of the nurse, I did not know of the magus, and I did not know of the feral. And through therapy, we did find out that I am only dangerous when I'm in a feral ego state. And once again, that has to be an aggression. My feral is just not going to go out and hurt random people. Now, if I'm in a severely feral state, and I have a provocation, it could get YouTube ugly. I mean, it's in all seriousness. And that's another one of the 1,000 reasons why with my complex PTSD that I get a check. Because I'm not dangerous. I'm not dangerous. But if you're a male and you come up and you're provocative to me, well, as I mentioned, it can get YouTube ugly very quick. But taking care of my mother, it was chipping away at this system of protection for the core ego state. My mother eventually died, and now I will get into another point. I almost died. Because you see, at this 5 years old, my tummy hurt. Mommy, my tummy hurts. Mommy, my tummy hurts. Shut up! You just don't want to go to school! No, my gut hurt. My gut hurt bad. My gut hurt unbelievably bad. But if you're a little kid, if you've got a pain right here, what are you going to say? Mommy, my tummy hurts. Well, it turns out that 5-year-old Mommy, my tummy hurts was a bad gallbladder. And at 15 years old, I started having gallbladder attacks, full-scale ones. The first doctor couldn't find anything. And all of his other little doctor friends said the same thing to cover up for him. And they said, it's all in your head. And once or twice for a week, starting at 15 years old, I started having massive gallbladder attacks and would be up 2 nights out of 7 in unimaginable pain. Now, once again, we go back to my origin story, and remember that ego state that we talked about? The rattlesnake, the one that bears the pain. You know, that created that ego state as the dominant. You know, I basically went into therapy, and after 3 years, I found out that I'm not quite me. And honestly, that is a bit disturbing. But, you know, I understand things the better now, and I understand why, where, how, and when. You know, and this is why I was on Xanax, by the way. You know, where we talked earlier about, you know, why, that I was on Xanax. This misdiagnosis is why I was on Xanax. And you're going to be astounded at this. They did not get me a proper diagnosis until I was 38 years old. I was misdiagnosed with that gallbladder for 23 years. And once or twice a week, for 6 to 9 hours, I would be in unimaginable pain. Now, when I was 16 years old, they actually convinced me I was crazy. And for 2 years, I believed their lies. That horrible pain in my side was in my mind and I was crazy. And after 2 years, I came to the conclusion I wasn't the one that was crazy. It was them that was covering up for their own medical malfeasance. Now, at 38 years old, you know, by that time I was, as I mentioned, you know, at 32 my life ended. So, you know, I was a caregiver for my mother at this time. And the nice doctor wouldn't take it out. I had what money I had. I had $600 I could give him for the surgery, and the rest of it was going to be paid for by the state. I want $1,200. I don't have it. And that son of a bitch, because of him, I had to have that gallbladder in for 4 more years and several emergency room trips. Well, one day, I had a gallbladder attack that didn't stop. And I ended up in the Rockcastle County emergency room. And that ER doctor ordered my gallbladder out. And then the partner of that guy that stiffed me, his partner had to take it out. So I didn't get that gallbladder out until I was 42 years old. So, I mean, you know, when I talked in the other videos about, you know, the human suffering that I have felt compared to everyone else, you know, I don't go around and flaunt this on YouTube. You know, I don't go around and talk about my pain. But I mean, you couldn't imagine the agony. And that was with an ego state that was made to take pain. And that's also another reason for my disability. You know how the Terminator can absorb damage? You know, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic on this point, but I can take great damage without flinching. You know, my father, you know, didn't come up to his groin, and, you know, he was taking his big-ass fist upside my head repeatedly every day for those certain period of years. That wildcat that I told you had kittens just knocked over the garbage can. Well, I'll have a chore to do after I get out of here. Since I have all the heat in this room, I have the garbage can in here. So, that's a bit of a digression. And I lost my place a little bit. Oh, yes, gallbladder. So, yes, I finally at 42 got it out. So, from 15 to 42, I had 1 to 2 gallbladder attacks a week for all of those years, coming to over thousands of incidents of feeling like I was stuck with a knife. When I had a seizure and was impaled on a knife, I just got up and pulled it out of my leg. I really didn't feel it. In reality, if I'm not in another ego state and you stab the rattlesnake, I might not notice. There's been times at work I found I'm bleeding. And I didn't know it, and had been working for quite some time. Hello, Smelly. Smelly, I'm doing my other video as live because the phone kept screwing it up, and I got tired of trying to do it again and again. But, that you'll want to watch this from the beginning, Smelly, by the way. I won't be interacting with chat much because I'll be trying to keep my place. So, that was why I was a complete asshole in my youth, I was kept in this unfeeling state, Most people generally around me said I was a psychopath. Now, my therapist told me, Roger, you are not a psychopath. And I looked at her funny and I said, you're really fucking up a good defense. And then she didn't expect me to say that, and she just laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed because I used to have her rolling laughing during therapy all the time, which I'm sure fucked with all the other therapists to hear a therapist just busting out laughing for an hour every session. Now, it turns out, though, that taking care of my mother was once again breaking at this system, bringing out that core ego state. And it turns out the core ego state has the seizures. I buried my entire family. I buried my mother with a shovel. And I remember the day very well. And to be honest, actually having to dig the whole grave yourself, that was extremely therapeutic. And afterwards, like for the whole next day, you passed out. And that huge exertion, I guess for some reason, I guess it was like a cry in its own way. And I mean, I never want to have to do that again, by the way. But, it was therapy in its own way. Now, it turns out, to give an example, now, as I said, in 2010, that gallbladder almost killed me. I mean, I was 150 pounds. When I got that gallbladder out, I was about to die. And no shit. And then I nursed myself back to health. And it took a long time. It took a couple years for me to get back fit to day-to-day strength. And back then I did drive. This is back then, I had some money. I sold some land. See, you people don't know this, but my 20-acre farm used to be a 33-acre farm. But, like Rich Life, I'm not going to spew these life numbers at everyone. And then, hi Ronnie, and then, I cut it down because myself with no equipment, I don't need over 20 acres. My mother sold all the equipment with me screaming at her not to. I had no say. My father left everything to my mother. I had what was mine, my money and my land, and my vehicle. But these are the things that happen in life, and she passed on, I buried her, I got myself back to health, and I ran into an issue. Because of my long-term unemployment taking care of her, no one would give me a job. That was a big issue. No one. And for the Amber crowd, that's Becky's problem around here. That she has been unemployed for so long, she is right now unemployable until she can find some way to crack back in, for 6 to 8 months into a job. Because there's one place here, a temporary place, that has all the factory jobs locked down. And if you haven't worked in the last 6 months, they're never giving you a job. So, that's what I ran into as an issue. So, once again, I made my own job. But I also, during this, fell in love with a lovely young woman. And where we talked about those cracks in my old system, it's emotion, the core ego state. And I started having seizures. Now, another thing about this, September 2nd, my core ego state shut down. My seizures immediately stopped. That minute. Now, when my channel was struck, people that I know were giving me condolences. And, people that I care about. Once again, my therapist is right. I am not a psychopath. Make things a lot easier if I was, but I'm not a psychopath. But, the people that were showing me emotion brought out emotion in me. And for about a week, I'm Joe. I'm doing, my other vid is alive because of technical difficulties. I'd get 18 minutes in it and it would disappear and be unuploadable. So we're doing my long video is alive. And from now on, I will do all my long videos as alive. Yes, Melly, and that's why I didn't get back to you, because after I saw that, and I was getting many messages, for a week and a half, I was sitting here seizing my ass off. But I wasn't going to tell anyone that because, I appreciate the condolences. It's just my condition. That's no one's fault. But I didn't want to tell YouTube that because I didn't want nice people to feel bad about being nice to me. Well, Smelly, there's also a secret. I've never filed for my appeal yet. Because 10 to 1, I'm going to get it back. Because everyone else is getting the channels back that was lost then. Because, this way, I can private the channel, edit the few details out of it that I want I won't say 100%, but if and when it does come back, and then I can edit out a few details that would be advantageous for me, because I had a few ego states that wanted to stop me from going back into a criminal career, and said some things that would be quite incriminating if I was to try such. And those things, if my channel comes back, will fall off of YouTube, and then the next day I would announce it coming back in, and then throwing it in a bunch of people's faces, because in reality I think there's probably a 65% to 80% chance I'll get it back. But you see, with the seizures, I can't type in numbers when I'm having my issue, when I'm having my condition, let's call it. It's very difficult. I needed another set of hands to file my appeal and couldn't get anyone to help me. So, it is what it is, and, so I really do think I'll get the channel back, but Smelly, in reality, the Grimgoth bits are important, the cat videos are important, but everything else is dated material. That's kind of it, with a channel like mine, I'm doing dated material. So, in reality, like I say, other than the comedy bits and the cat videos, all of it really is deletable. So, that's where I'm like, and they think I care. It's not like I ever had a monetized channel. And I didn't monetize a channel because I knew I would be attacked. I've been attacked all my life. Those ego states expect it. We plan for it. We find the best ways that I could be attacked. And then we find ways to turn that against the other guy. I mean, it took 3 years in therapy, and my therapist said one day, she looked at me and said, Roger, you have borderline personality disorder. And I said, I do? And then she laid it out for me. Now, you see, if people that have been here a long time, we talk about my psychological issues. And we talk about mine do not hash out like others people's. Like my depression. I don't feel depressed. You know, it forms itself into a drive, an inner drive. You know, like your depression, you're not content. Well, my ego states like the knight, the magus, and the rattlesnake will take that and create motivation. You know what? Beavis of Butthead has one wisdom. This sucks. Change it. And that's always been my philosophy in life. If something sucks, then we change it. Well, the thing is it actually turns out that the negative parts of my borderline go into my criminal career. I'm not manipulative unless we're doing bad guy things. Because, you know, in my former career, the amount of times I've been betrayed. And the first few times it hurts. And then after that, you expect it. And then you plan for it. And then when you get betrayed, then you are absolutely ruthless in response. Well, many things are overly diagnosed, but you know, I do agree. I do have borderline, but once again, my negative traits of my borderline go into my criminal career. And they actually turned into an asset because I would take horrible people and manipulate them one against the other. Well, actually, Ronnie, there is. I mean, that's where we get into the feral ego state. Because, you see, as the magus, I learn. And one of the things that is an absolute, something that is not acceptable one day can be completely societally acceptable the next. And let me give you an example. We used to drop bombs on people's heads and level whole cities. And now if people try to do that, it's a war crime. What once was acceptable now is completely unacceptable. Now, unfortunately, the unacceptable, once again, can become completely acceptable. And that's where we see in our society. You know, in civil discourse and all the current violence. Now, my system always believes society gets to set the rules. You know, because, once again, I'm not that attached to humanity. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Because you see, there was that shutdown of the child as a child. And that little tiny kid saw you all as monsters. And had the belief of, I am not one of you. Well, that ego state soon went away and just became reflections of emotion. But that I am not one of you part resonates in all the protectors. I am not one of you. You know, it is like I am almost a different species all unto itself in its way. I'm not, you know. Let's be honest, I'm not. But when we talk about perceptions and realities, you know, it does come with that. Because, once again, my feral ego state, because of the pain at birth, you know, I didn't get a childhood, as my therapist said. And then having to fend through myself for food throughout my childhood, that kept that feral ego state right there. So, that's where I used to tell, you know, like, if we were young, Smelly, and we had met each other, I would tell you that I'm more like a human house cat. And it was true. But it would actually come down that that was my feral ego state, even though I didn't understand it at the time. So, you know, it is what it is. And September 2nd, you know, my ego state shut down. Well, my therapist, we had the argument of me coming to YouTube. And my ego states were already arguing. over my condition. When I had my first seizures, I had 5 ego states sit on one side saying, we will turn ourselves to the system for help. And the 6th ego state said, no, you are a fool. They will leave you to die. They will not help you. It is all platitudes. They say these things because they want to feel better about themselves. They want to feel better about their society. They want to go to heaven. They want to feel they're good people. And the others were willing to have faith. Each of them had their own opinion, but the 5 came to the conclusion, the core ego state was among the 5, by the way, that I should turn myself over to the system. And the rattlesnake said, you are fools, and I will prove it. And that's where the start of the contest came in. I will not commit crime. I will not actualize myself. I will turn myself over to the system, and we will see what happens. After all, I'm the one that does most of the suffering anyway. And thus, between the 6 distinct ego states, a pact was made. And the problem was the ending of this pact. Because, as this was years ago, the thing is, how do we decide who wins? And, for years, that went on and on and on. Who's right? That was really hard. And then COVID came around. My therapist used to tell me, people love you, Roger. We care about you. Well, COVID came about. I'm with my peer support in the drive-thru on a Tuesday. I get a call on the phone. And it says, do you need a ride to the grocery store? And I looked at my peer support. And they were going Wednesday. And I said, are we okay for Thursday? She said, yeah. And then I waved off my ride to the grocery store. And I never got that offer to ride to the grocery store ever again. And then Wednesday she calls me up late and cancels my peer support, says everything has been cut off without notice. And me with no food, nothing at the house. I had to go to the grocery store, and this was the day before grocery day. I pointed that out, of course. I also admitted, I have no way to the store. I'm disabled. I have rights. I'm a human being. And then they cut off my peer support from MindSight and cut me off from MindSight. And then at Adanta, they did something similar. And as soon as I just said, when they were doing similar shit to me, I said, I want to talk to someone, and I want to find out what my rights are. That's what I said. Just like I said it. And you know what they said? You're threatening us. I just said I wanted to talk to someone and see what my rights are. That's all I said, just like that. Yep. And they too cut me off and tossed me onto the street. And that's why my water's not fixed. And that's why I don't get any help from these little people like Shannon like to. Because these maggots were so worried that they might catch the COVID, they left me to die. Well, guess what? Game, set, match, Rattlesnake wins. Takes on other 5 ego states and comes out with a victory. And that's the way it is. And you're seeing the Rattlesnake ego state now because I am bringing him out. Because in his full, Chella. Chella. See, the Rattlesnake always took care of the core ego state, the nurse. Some of the other ego states don't even like the nurse. But the Rattlesnake was always her main protector. Now, my ego states will kind of blend like flavors, like eating two different jelly beans. And when the rattlesnake is having the feral, you know, when the rattlesnake and the feral combine, see, the feral is holding the kitty in one hand. And the magus is doing a little appearance, you know, explaining things here and there. And this is how it would be growing up. But, of course, I thought all of this came out of the rattlesnake ego state, and I was absolutely wrong. Because my hyperintelligence is one ego state. I seriously think that if I'm in my core ego state only, I do believe I lose 25 IQ points. And, you know, it is what it is. So, yes. And my whole therapy and coming to YouTube was all just a test for me between my ego states. Which one of us is right? Now, I did used to have a lot of guilt in my past life. Now, I do have to say, after therapy and understanding, I regret nothing. Not a bit. And that is an advantage to me. So, you know, either way YouTube went, I win. Because it was a contest between myself. Everything else was just icing on a cake. Because if I have to, you know, once again, these other 5 ego states will take care of the one. You know, my goal for a long time was to get better, settle down, and have a family. Well, I'm 53 now, and after Karen and Stephanie, no families happen because the average woman's got so much baggage now, all they want to do is throw it in your face and project their past on you. And I'm not going to be no one's enabler. So, you know, when I was young, you know, I would go around as a wild creature and do my thing and sleep around here and there, and at some point when I wanted to settle down, I stopped. And because I wanted to have a family and I wanted to treat Miss Right right. And after Karen, there's going to be no marriage. There's going to be no Miss Right. So, you know, I'm back to, you know, if I find a woman that wants to sleep with me with no long-term commitment, we're hopping in the snack. And that's already been happening. I mean, you know, in these last few months, yeah, that's already been happening. But, you know, I'm not going to bring that to YouTube because it really don't matter. I mean, Rich Life, I kind of feel sorry for the guy almost. I don't want to talk about him because too much, because I'm just using this as an example. But, I mean, that poor guy's obsessed to no end. Now, I am going to make one joke. That new person that I'm watching, her scam was she was going to be a professional cuddler. For $80 a cuddle. I'm like, shit. $80 a cuddle? Can I get on this little cuddling business shit? I mean, where I am, you get more than cuddles for $25. I mean, I don't have to pay, but, you know, if I really, really, really wanted to, you know, kind of like Uber Eats delivery, you know, $80 would buy me 3 girls and each of us a Coca-Cola to drink. I mean, I'd have one for this end, one for that end, and one to peg me. And that's all the joke I'm going to make because, you know, once again, I wanted to put a joke in there to make a little levity because, you know, the subject of these 2 videos suck. But, you know, this is my thing, is I have these 6 ego states, and I understand who I am and what I am. And I am going to try to stimulate the core ego state for funsies and give you guys a Veronica Live. I'm going to try. And that's why you've not had Veronica Lives. Because my core ego state has been submerged. I know I've been treated horribly. Inside and outside of YouTubers. Now, once again, the rattlesnake's philosophy from the very beginning. Humans are like rocks. Some humans are gems. And those humans are worth defending, supporting. Those humans are worth dying for. But those humans are 1 in 1,000 in the rattlesnake's mind. And a part of this test proved it. Now, my test was anecdotal to my life. But it is true. And I can go through my life now, and I can find the human gems in the world, and I can take care of them. I can support them. I can help them. Because that's what my core ego state, the one that does emotion, the one that's so damaged, that's what that ego state would want. Now, once again, we go to the other ego states, where we talk about the other ego states' help. Now, the rattlesnake is the one that really takes core of the nurse ego state. The magus ego state hates the core ego state. I mean, to the extreme. You know, all my ego states don't get along. Now, if you watch me long enough, if I brag, it is the night. Because I am great. So there. And that's what you're going to get out of the night. You know, I can prove my greatness. Can you? I mean, he's a bit of a hard guy. But that's sometimes why my therapist would mistake the knight for the rattlesnake. Because the rattlesnake is abrasive, but also most of the time he's just sitting there not doing nothing. And don't care. Because everything to the rattlesnake is a shade of gray. Where to the knight, everything's in black and white. So you can see where their friction is. You have one ego state that will say right, wrong, white, black. And then the rattlesnake will over, and then he will point out to the knight all the shades of gray in the middle. And then the knight will invoke honor. And then the rattlesnake will want to pet the knight on the head. Because there is no honor amongst thieves. Or anyone else for that matter. You know, just saying. And these are things, because like I say, I have these 6 point of views. The rattlesnake has the hardest point of view. And as I mentioned, you know, he was heavily dominant. So, you know, we fought, and the rattlesnake won. It's not the world that I want to live in. But where we talked about one thing that's not acceptable one day can be completely acceptable another. You know, when I started having therapy, I was not in the world that I was formed in, that I grew up in. You know, the 70s and the 80s, you know, it could be pretty rough, depending on where and who you were. In the 90s too, the early 90s. Now, your world is meeting my world. And what at one time was not socially acceptable is becoming totally socially acceptable again. And I sigh. Because why? I don't want it that way. But it is the way that it is. And as we talked about earlier, the humans get to make the rules of the game, and this animal just plays by them. So, you know, I'm going to do my thing. You know, another reason I didn't get help is everyone would say, you know, let's just, how are we going to put this YouTube friendly? You know, they would expect me to go into the business and sell illicit chemical substances. Because that's what they do around here. And I could have. And my water would be fixed. And everything would have been fine. And I would not ever have missed a meal. So, that's where I think about myself, and this is where I stand. So, if you were me, what would you do? Now, another interesting factoid, when I was working in the barn, I found one of my stash spots. As being a professional criminal one time when I moved down here, I have places all over that I could hide something that no one could ever find a thing. And while I was doing work, I found one of my old places that I hadn't looked in forever. Because no need to. I'm not in that life anymore. And this was in it. Yes, this bandana here. This bandana is very old. It's very worn. And with my PTSD, when I look at myself here, I also remember looking at myself in a mirror, and this just absolutely covered in blood and coming down my face. And Shannon made fun once of me having my bandana tight. But that's why you put your bandana tight. So if you're injured, you don't bleed everywhere like a stuck pig leaving DNA. Because with its tight, it'll absorb beyond the bandana. Now, my bandana was soaked, and, blood was, coming down my face. And I remember that moment. And when I wear this bandana and I look at here, one part of me sees me, and another part, that complex PTSD, I see my face absolutely bloody. But, that's the world that I live in. And because of being a child in so much suffering, well, a baby in so much suffering, that's what gave me night terrors. And I stopped smoking pot for about a decade. And I ate the night terrors. And that's what completely desensitized me to fear. Because throughout my early criminal career, I felt fear just like everyone else did. I don't anymore. I can have concern. I can be, maybe a little angst, but there's no fear. And it's nice in a way, and then it's not. Because it is always a reminder that you are not like everyone else. And once again, we talked about my life, as a child, I was a good child. Why? I was in shock. And until a little neighbor girl made me play with her. Literally, she did. Pushy little girl. But, I wouldn't play as a child. I would just sit in shock. And events through my life fed these negative ego states and kept them dominant and made them all into their own person. In reality, I am a fully functional supervillain. I can make gadgets. There's not much I can't do. If I put my mind to it. I can make something out of scrap. My first job was a fabricator at Lighting Systems Incorporated. My next big job, I was a caster, and I took molten metal and worked with it. And I've had various things throughout my career, jobs that, have helped me, Now, one of my side projects, where we talk about these ego states, they each get their own side projects. So we're, like people say, you're sitting there watching YouTube. My whole life I've always bounced from project to project to project. That's one reason I always wanted a place with land. Now, an interesting thing, the rattlesnake also contains imagination. And he is the rider. It's odd, but that is how it is. Now, maybe the sense of adventure, helped spur imagination and created this effect, but, You know, it's created a system to where every day I argue about myself over everything. Like what to do. I'll think what to do. And then the night will chime in and give me a list. What strategically would be the best choice for me to do with what I have? And then I go, yeah. And then I do it that way. So, you know, that's just an example of, you know, my inner arguments all the time. Now, another interesting thing where the Magus ego state is super intelligent, he doesn't do math. He needs another ego state for math. He needs the devil. Because where we talk about me as a child scavenging, that was the same time they were teaching us math. So it turned out that my math skills, which are excellent, went into the devil ego state, the one that does business. Now, an example of this. Now, the Magus ego state, he likes precision. I mean, Spock-like precision. And just like the rest of humans, the other ego states get annoyed at that. Now, if you look at where I counted the cat food, it was 132 pounds. Once again, the devil ego state was doing the math. The devil ego state rounded down. Because that's what the devil ego state does, because I am not putting everything out to a decimal point, because I have one ego state that is so psychotically compulsive about precision in exacts. You know, that's where the two of them fight. You know, the Magus would like that extra math, and fuck you, I'm rounding down. And that's basically it. To where the Magus is also socially inept. Where the devil is absolutely, positively a social creature. Now, it does turn out that human beings, where I talk about the mix, they like the devil and my core ego state. Now, it turns out that if those two ego states are mixed, everyone loves me. And a part of my therapy was to learn now to, you know, my later part of my therapy is to start stimulating these ego states to get the Roger that I need. Not the Roger I end up with. You know, kind of like the Batman thing. But, you know, that is what it is. Now, my therapist knows all my criminal past, every horrible thing that I ever did, and she called me a rogue. And it's true. Because, you know, I had lines, and if my criminal compatriots wanted to do something that I believed was completely unacceptable, you know, I engineered their downfall from behind the scenes. Yep, I did, you know. You know, and those are people that I had known for a long, long time. But, you know, once again, if you're going to do something that I would be absolutely, positively, totally against as a criminal, and I find a way that I could take all the money, yeah, I used to do that. I mean, that's where I go with my borderline personality disorder. That's how it would act out. Yes, it would. Because you see, once again, we go on with my criminal career, and, you know, you would find your compatriots over the years, one by one, would cheat you. And this would be my reaction. I mean, that would be my reaction. Because I know at this point, our friendship is over. And then a little bit after that, I start thinking about a big deal. And then I get the guy that cheated me in on the big deal. See, the thing about being honest in business 1,000% of the time is that 0.1 that you're not, they will fall for hook, line, and sinker. And that's exactly what I would do. When my criminal compatriots would cheat me, I would engineer a sweet deal, because every now and then sweet deals did come up. And it would be a large money deal. and I would cheat them. And I would take all their money. And I would laugh in their face after I did it. And I would give them the option. And at that point, they would back down, and our criminal association was over. I got a big pile of money, and I also gave an example that you don't cheat me. I mean, you might think you get away with it, and I might wait a while, but you're not going to get away with it. Now, the reason why you say is, Roger, why may you be that arrogant? Everybody sells everyone out. You know, and that's the wonderful thing. Now, of course, you have to prove that first behind the scenes, but it usually don't take too long. And that's the part that leaves me shaking my head. It's like, you know, we could have made lovely money together till the end of time. But you had to get greedy. And once again, that's what that rattlesnake ego state does. He protects the core ego state and the rest. Now, the knight, he always acts honorable. But at the point that someone else hits the point of dishonor, then the system basically goes to the rattlesnake and says, okay, you handle this. And then the rattlesnake is more than happy to. Why? Because, broken toe. Because the rattlesnake, well, technically, you might say that he's evil. Maybe. Arguably. But it comes down to a amoral. Once again, we have all of our wonderful, wonderful ego states. My rattlesnake ego state does not do morality. The knight does right and wrong, and the nurse does emotion. So, you know, those two ego states take care of that. That's one reason why I can emotionally take myself out of a situation. Because if we take the knight out of a situation, and we take the core ego state out of a situation, I can give 100% unbiased opinions. Oh, hi, Linda. My chat wasn't, but you know, this is a presentation because I couldn't get the video to take on the iPhone. So, you know, if you go back from the beginning, you basically have the part 2. And that kind of wraps up our presentation. So now I will sit here and chat for a little while. And if anyone ever wants, you know, you want any questions about it all, feel free. I will entertain hard questions. So, you know, the thing is sometimes my self-actualization is good and sometimes my self-actualization is bad. Sometimes my self-actualization saves people. Sometimes my self-actualization destroys people. But once again, you know, it basically has to have the knight, the one that does right and wrong, give the okay. You know, he's my moral compass. Linda, I would never block you. But, you know, I have these arguments about everything. Like when I get off here. Now, I didn't tell you guys this because a good part of this part is my own fault. I've had like a meal and 4 pieces of bread in like 6 days. And I have not wanted to walk. I have not. I mean, I've got it in my pocket. I got like $26 in my pocket I could eat on right now, but, you know, I've got about nothing here, and Friday I'll get a ride to Dollar General when I get my meds. But once again, it's the ego states. And I've slid back into my old system. Let me see. In the last 6 days, I had a 2-hour nap, a 6-hour sleep, a 2-hour sleep, and I had an 8-hour sleep last night. And that's all the sleep I've had in several days. And I really didn't even need that. Because the rattlesnake ego state doesn't sleep. I mean, if I was stimulated with danger and adrenaline, I'll never sleep. And it sucks. If I can't get into the feral ego state, and if I can't get into the nurse ego state, I cannot sleep. Fortunately, the kitties are a stimulant for the feral ego state. So, sometimes, like last night, we're doing stuff like that. Like right now, that helps dominate the feral. Notice my language in that last sentence. The feral doesn't like to talk. The feral uses the rattlesnake for language skills. Basically, it's like having an animal inside and another ego state has to translate for them. Now, only the rattlesnake does that, though. Because sometimes the feral will be trying to tell another ego state something and just can't get it out. And the rattlesnake will have to explain what the feral means to the other ego state. Hello on the level. So, that's another interesting thing about me. But if you starve me, deprive me, if you put my life in danger, you bring out the part of me that could be dangerous. But once again, it's only dangerous if there's the stimulation for it to be dangerous. Hence, I am listed as non-violent. Emma, honey. What do you think, Richella? Now that made me sleepy. We talk about that and only certain ones do sleepy? That whole little thing that tells you? And she just purred her head off. Cat purr also helps me sleep because it helps me get into feral. Now, the Magus, if he's about, he's always active thinking about something. Now, an interesting thing, as I mentioned, how these ego states combine. They also do something where we talk about super villainy. They do quite combine into an interesting creature. Now, the Knight is doing strategy. The Magus is feeding me tactical information. And the Rattlesnake is doing the motion. Because when I was a child, they did the Gatsby tests. And there was a manual dexterity test. And I completed it in half the time allotted. And all the other children, through the full time allotted, didn't get halfway. It turns out that I have a superhuman manual dexterity. And that is why I've always done factory jobs I prefer, and I've always been very good at them. And it's why I've always kept all of these. Remember, I've talked about in the past where I like to do dangerous jobs because of quicker advancement. And this advantage of this high manual dexterity, this high intelligence, my agility, and my rattlesnake ability to bear hardship, like I said, that gives me a leg up to the world on everybody. Because I can do a job that's absolutely backbreaking. And it doesn't hurt me as bad because the rattlesnake is doing it. Because most anything that involves a pain, the rattlesnake's doing. And that's always the way it was. But it's... I had to just censor myself for YouTube. I hate the way YouTube is right now. I mean, I really do. Now, it would have been interesting. It would have reflected negative upon me, but if it wouldn't have been for the terms of service thing, I would have blurted it out. I worked in some places with some pretty rough people. And a good part of them were scared of me, which I was fine with. Now, another thing where I've always kind of, used to say life's a bitch for everyone else is I always sold drugs to my boss. And I mean, when you're at a workplace and you're the boss's dealer, I mean, you kind of get where I'm going with that. I mean, you talk about special privilege, and like your typical plant, I would know every single human being in it that would get a buzz. And of course, everyone else wouldn't know this, and I would keep my mouth shut. Take care, Sarah. But I have my issues. Well, we learn, as young men, we learn from each other. You see, I was also blessed with another thing. A high intelligence group around me as a teenager. And they were also as much criminally reprobate as I was. And everyone had their speciality. I could get into anywhere. Now, Paul, at 12 years old, he blew a hole in his floor this big. And that's where I learned the wonderful things about electricity and gunpowder. And once again, throughout criminals, I would go and pick up new skills. At 15 years old, where people, I think it's funny, it's like, you're in an 18-year-old girl's chat. I was a 15-year-old person that had 30-some-year-old men as associates that were all Vietnam War veterans that all probably killed people on double digit, you'd be doing fingers and toes. And all of them probably had double digits in the getting rid of human beings. And like I say, the amount of human evil I've seen in my life is just astounding. And that's kind of how I have to laugh is, see, at 15 years old, I was mistaken for mid-20s. Evolution isn't always the same for everyone, and I always grew first. And at 16 years old, I got man body. Well, really at 15. Well, really 15 was turning into. But 15 turned by 16, I had man body. And by 15 and 16, I was going into bars, I was sleeping with adult women, and not a single one of them was knowing I was a minor. But back then it wouldn't have mattered anyway. It was a whole different, they didn't card you coming in and I would just go into bars and drink beer because, back then there was no 21. To get into a bar, it was 18. And I looked in my mid-20s. And I did that till I got sick of that. And bars for me were places of business after that. For me, that's what a bar really was. After I got over that, shall we say, 17 and a half A's, a bar was just a place that I met people to meet to do business. Oh, God, I'm thinking of all the horrible ones. I mean, and now and then they would say, go over to Newport to the strip clubs. And I hated going to the strip clubs and waiting on a drug deal. I mean, you're sitting there waiting on your guy, and all the strippers are there trying to hit on you to try to get you to buy them $30 drinks for a $1 Coke. And you're like telling him, go the hell away. And there was this one that I'm looking over and it's like, Mom! Because, I mean, she was old enough to be my mother, and me at about 21 at the time. And that was my reaction to her, too. But, these were the things that we do, One thing that is not acceptable one day can completely be acceptable another. And I sit here, and I moved out of the world that I was no longer acceptable. Now, I look out there and on YouTube land and throughout the world and at the American streets, and your world is quickly becoming my world. Sorry about your luck. I mean, really, I am. And that's usually what we said as bad guys. You know, when someone wanted empathy, that was your standard. I mean, sorry about your luck. I mean, and that's how in bad guy world that works. That's bad guy empathy. Now, once again in my criminal career, another thing that helped me was the core ego state. That little bit of emotion here and there. I'm going to have a moment. Oh, stress break. And why am I doing that? Because of my past. You would not believe on what emotional basket cases most professional criminals are. I mean, my therapist wanted me to become a therapist because your typical high-level bad guy, at some point, he's talking to me, telling him all of the problems. And then that stimulates the core ego state, and then the other 5 ego states start solving their problems for them. I'm hardwired that way. I mean, it's like a moth to the flame kind of thing. That's why, if you notice for a long time, I feel a compulsive need to give useful advice. That's where it comes from. That the way those ego states put together, I have a horrible compulsion to be helpful. I'm the rattlesnake now, and I find it fucking offensive. But when I'm in disguise, that is my one flaw. Being helpful. And I have to remind myself of that when I am in disguise. Don't be overly helpful. You will give yourself away. And then the nurse does it anyway. Cunt. No, I don't mean it there. Because she's not. Now, she's the emotion, but again, when we talk about the rattlesnake, she is like, don't mess up a good thing. And he jokes at her. But when the rattlesnake says something about the nurse, he is meaning humor. Now, the Magus, he really hates her. I mean, really, really, really. The opinion was stupid, useless. And then that therapist comes out and then tells the Magus that that's the core you. Which then the rattlesnake sitting here doing this to Magus, he just said, mm-hmm. And you thought you were important. Because see, you know, once again, I thought as the rattlesnake that I was the core ego state. And then, once again, that kind of throws, a shade onto the Magus, too. You're quite not what you thought you were, now are you, dude? Hi, Cass. But, that's how things work in my head. I get laughs at myself all the time. These ego states, that's one reason why I don't overly take myself seriously. But I can take myself seriously. Well, Cass, in bad guy land, cognitive issues were common, from blows to the head. I've seen some messed up people. And then people that knew them forever telling me they weren't once that way, and then telling me how they got that way. My mother, after her brain damage, she did not come out the same person. It was totally different. Mother was gone in 2001. It was another decade before she was dead, but, basically, I lost my father one year, and I lost everything of my mother up here the next. And then while I took care of Mother, the whole family passed on, one by one. And I got to the point where I don't even like to pick up the phone. Because there was many times that before I pick it up, I knew what that call was before I picked it up. And I was always right. And that made me sick. Hi, Brenda. Well, this is a special live, and you'll want to watch it from the beginning. This is really a video. But my severe long videos, I'm going to have to do as lives. And I'm getting ready to quit right here in a moment. because I really told you guys the important issues. Why I came to YouTube. How I fight with myself every day. And now, people like Shannon doesn't understand this, but the rattlesnake ego state, I love conflict. I mean, absolutely positively. The rattlesnake lives for conflict. What you get out of a hug, the rattlesnake gets out of a conflict. Once again, I'm not right. But I understand where these things come from. And at times, when it's societally acceptable, certain ego states can go with certain things that at certain times they might not have been able to. Now, I'm going to end this here and get myself something to drink, because my mouth is completely dry and you will probably see me sometime soon. Now, one thing I do want to say, now this isn't a promise, but I am going to go for an April 1st Verily Veronica Live. It may end up Saturday, it may end up Sunday, it may end up Monday. That's why I'm not posting on the community tab. So, don't be surprised if you see a notice on the community tab saying Verily Veronica Live. But the day that I do it, I will put on the community tab, there will be a Verily Veronica Live. Because I'm going to try to work where we talked about stimulating ego states. I am going to attempt to bring out this submerged ego state so you can have a Verily Veronica Live, and it's a bit of therapy for myself all along the way. Now, everyone, thank you for bearing with me, and if you didn't watch this from the beginning, please do. And watch the first part that I made as a video. Now, everyone, please have a good day.